Hello everybody, my name is Deja and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing the mid-year book freakout tag. I agree with probably the majority of y'all that I should be filming this in July because the midway point of the year is actually July 2nd, but the majority of people start posting these in June, and I feel like by the time I filmed and edited it after the midpoint of the year, everybody would be sick of these videos and wouldn't want to watch. So here I am posting it in June. I hope that y'all can forgive me. So far this year, I've read 53 books, which my goal every year is 100 books. So I am ahead on that goal, but in my head, I always try to aim for a similar amount of books that I read last year or try to one up it. So really my goal is probably like closer to 130, so I'm a little bit behind for that. But honestly, I've been very slumpy this year for the past 3 to 3.5 months since March. It is what it is. Hopefully I'll be able to read more books in the second half of the year and I will be less slumpy. We're gonna get into the first question, and that is the best book that I read so far this year. And would it really be a Deja tag video if I didn't have multiple answers for each question? No. So I think I have multiple answers for almost every single question on this tag. I have 5 answers. The first one is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. This one is actually one that I think I gave 4.5 stars, but when I was looking at all the books I read so far this year and which ones really stood out, this was one of them. And this one we follow Emily, and she is a professor at Oxford in the early 1900s, and she is working on this Encyclopedia of Fairies because in this world there are magical fairies that are not like Sarah J Maas, like fairies, like very like sexy brooding creatures. They're like real fairies, more like little creatures that fly around. There's different species and everything like that, so that's why she's making this encyclopedia. She is going to the last destination that she has to go to study these fairies for her encyclopedia. And we do also have a romance in this book with one of her colleagues, Wendell Brambleby, who ends up showing up to the place that she's at and is basically like, oh, you shouldn't be alone because it's a dangerous world out here. Not because she's a woman, but just because it's a dangerous world. Emily doesn't really like people that much. She honestly doesn't even like Wendell, but she realizes and recognizes that he is like the only friend that she really has. This book has a lot of found family in it, and a lot of people say that Emily is autistic coded or like on the spectrum, and that has not been confirmed by the author, but I am neurodivergent. I am diagnosed with ADHD. This book was just so much fun. I had so much whimsy to it, and this one has like footnotes and things like that in it, and it's written as like more journal entries, which I found like a really interesting take on this, and I just loved it. This next one I'm not going to talk about too much with this question because it does appear in a different question, and that is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I loved this book and it really took me off guard, which is why it comes up in a different question. I just love this one so much. I love Abby Jimenez and I can't wait to read her entire backlist. The next one I think is actually one of my first, or if not the first book I read this year, and that is Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. And I actually tabbed this one up. I think this is the only book I've tabbed so far this year. I loved this one so much. We follow Yasmin and Josiah, and they're actually a divorced couple. They have, I believe, 2 kids together, and they co-parent. They also own a restaurant together, so they collaborate a lot in that way. They're just very used to their life now that they're divorced, but this is a second chance romance, so they do have like a kiss that kind of changes everything. And I feel like a lot of people don't like second chance romance. I really do, and it's because of books like this. This is the type of book where like you can completely understand why this couple got divorced, like what caused them to get divorced, and it wasn't really them, it was something that caused cracks in their relationship, but then you see why they start to connect again and how they're better now and how their relationship is different than how it was before. I just love seeing how they were falling apart and how they now put themselves back together separately, which allows them to come back together as a whole unit. And I just really love this one a lot. It had so much emotional depth in it. Please look up trigger warnings for any books that I mentioned, but this one I think definitely could have some things that trigger people, so I'd be careful of this book if you have any triggers. The next one is Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. I need to get me a physical copy, but I love this one. It's more of a novella length. We follow a woman who has recently moved to a small town, and she is going to like a farmer's market type thing one day. She notices a woman who is selling products, like anything that could be made in your house, she is selling. Our main character gets very entranced by her and ends up striking up a friendship, and they start to become friends, maybe a little bit more. This is a horror book, so I'm not going to get into how it is horrific, but I really, really like this one. I know it's not for everybody because it's not everybody's type of horror. It does lean more realistic because I know some people think because it's described as like a sapphic, dark cottagecore horror that some people would probably think that it leans more like whimsical, fantasy, paranormal type of horror, and that's not the direction that it goes in. But I personally really like that because I prefer more realistic horror over more fantastical horror. I just love the relationship between the characters in this story. It was so phenomenally written as well. It was such a good read, and I love all the cottagecore vibes. And the last book that I have to mention for this question is Butcher and Blackbird by Bryn Weaver. I love this one. It is a romance between two serial killers who both kill other serial killers. It's so good. They have a competition every year where they decide that they're going to set their sights on one victim and see who can kill them first. And it's just so fun. Like, this is literally like a dark rom-com. We're following serial killers, obviously, so we're getting more gruesome elements with the killings and things like that, but it is more like rom-com, lighthearted when it comes to the romance, and I really loved that combination. I know this book has not been for everybody. Some people have really loved it. Some people have really hated it. I fall in the camp of really loving it because it was just so fun to me and not something that you take super seriously. I just realized that 3 of these books on my top 5 are romance, and then all 5 of them have romance elements in it. So that's really interesting. I guess I'm in my romance era again. Next up is the best sequel that you've read so far this year, and the first one that I have is Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. I actually read The Hunger Games when I was 11. This is what got me into reading young adult and booktube. I ended up deciding to reread this series with my patrons, so we did a live show for every single book in this series. We have the one for the last book, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, coming up, and the new book has been announced, so I'm really excited for that one as well. But this is my favorite book in the series of the main trilogy because that's what I've read so far. I haven't read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes yet. It is such a good sequel. It has so many elements that I love from the first book, but kind of heightens it and brings in a lot of elements from the last book as well, and it's just such a good sequel. It'll literally never age because the messaging of the story is timeless. I have one more for this one, and that is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J Maas. I continued on in the ACOTAR series and finished this one up this year, and I really enjoy this one because I love Nesta as a character. I like her much more than Feyre, and I just love her so much and what she goes through in this story, and she's so relatable because she is really a hurt person and she does things to hurt other people that we especially see in the other books, and you don't really understand why, but getting into this one you really start to understand her psyche and why she does the things that she does and how she's trying to get better, because you can be a person who really wants to get better, who really wants to change, but sometimes things just happen. Like, someone says something and you just snap and you didn't mean to. It was just like a reaction. I feel like that's really explored in this story, and like depression and just mental health. I love those discussions so much. Question 3 is, what new releases do you want to read but haven't yet? I have a lot for this one. The first one is Midnight on Beacon Street, and this one is one that I haven't heard anybody talk about, but it is like a slasher that I believe takes place in the 80s or 90s, and it has to do with like a babysitter, so it's very much giving like Halloween kind of vibes, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's what got me into horror movies, so I really wanted to pick this one up. It came out back in January and I still have not read it, and it's also on my 24 books to read in 2024, so I need to get to it. Then House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J Maas. The reason I read A Court of Silver Flames is because I wanted to read that one before I went to House of Flame and Shadow, and I still haven't gotten to it yet. It's the 3rd book in the Crescent City series, and I cannot wait to continue on that series because it's actually my favorite series from Sarah J Maas. The 3rd one is This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. As I said, I loved Before I Let Go, and This Could Be Us is the sequel to that, where we follow the friend of Yasmin in Before I Let Go, and I think it has a lot to do with like self-dating and like falling in love with yourself, which I find a really interesting topic, and I cannot wait to dive into that one. Next up is Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. I know Geneva Rose is a very divisive author, but I personally loved The Perfect Marriage. Like, I love that book, and then her release last year that nobody liked, I did not read that one. I recently bought it, but I have not read it yet. This release from her though sounds so phenomenal, and a lot of people who didn't like her release last year still really enjoyed this one. It has a VHS tape element. I I believe we follow 3 siblings that are cleaning out the home of their recently deceased mother, and their father is no longer in the picture. I think he left a couple years prior to the beginning of this story, and they find these VHS tapes. On it, their mom and their dad are like with a dead body or something like that, and like talking about how they're going to cover it up, and those VHS tapes take place in the 90s. So I'm really interested in this one because I love just like the 90s VHS tapes, and then the idea that they're finding something on these VHS tapes that are exposing their parents is very much reminding me of that one episode of Black Mirror. I don't want to say which one so I don't spoil it for you, but if you know, you know, and it reminds me of that episode. Next up is Private Rights by Julia Armfield, which I am really excited for because I loved Our Wives Under the Sea by this author last year. And I have also read Salt Slow, which is a short story collection by her, which I just thought was okay. But this one, I have no idea what it's about at all. I just saw that it was a new Julia Armfield release, and I'm really excited to pick it up. And then lastly, I have Middle of the Night by Riley Sager, which as I'm filming this has not come out yet. But by the time I post this, it should be out. So that's why I'm putting it on this section of the list. And I read every single one of Riley Sager's releases, as a lot of people on BookTube do. I love his work. Not every single one of his is like a favorite for me, but I do have a lot of his works that I really enjoy, and I've never disliked any of them. So I'm really excited to check this one out, especially because it is his first male protagonist that he's writing, which I think should be a very interesting departure from his previous works. Question 4 is, what anticipated releases do you have for the second half of the year? The first one that I have is Somewhere Beyond the Sea by TJ Klune. I love TJ Klune's work. I know he's kind of a controversial author, but The House in the Cerulean Sea is one of my favorite books of all time, and this is the sequel of it, which I never thought is something that we would get. The House in the Cerulean Sea really has like a special place in my heart, so I'm nervous for the sequel, but as I said, I trust TJ Klune, and I'm really hoping he does a good job with this one. Then I have So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison. Honestly, just by like the cover, it's giving vampires, which I don't know if it is, but I'm really excited. She has become one of my new favorite authors, which we will talk about in a couple questions as well. I cannot wait to read this one, especially if it is vampires. I'm also really excited to read An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson. I love The Year of the Witching by this author. I also read House of Hunger by her, and I just thought it was okay, but this one sounds amazing because it's actually dark academia, but it's marked #1 horror and then fantasy, and it is also adult, which her other 2 works I wouldn't mark it as adult. And it says, a student will find that their hardest lessons sometimes come outside the classroom in this stunning dark academia novel from the acclaimed author of The Year of the Witching and House of Hunger. So it's gonna be dark academia, which makes me so excited. The last one is American Rapture by CJ Lead, who wrote Mayfly, and that was just a really intense horror book that was so good, and I have no idea what this one is about at all, but it's by that same author, so I really want to pick it up. Question 5 is the biggest disappointment, and the first one that I have is Immortal Pleasures by V. Castro. I recently posted a wrap up because I read this in May, and this was in that video, which I gave 2 stars originally, but then after my discussion with my Patreons, I lowered this one to a 1 star, and it is my least favorite book that I've read so far this year, which makes me super disappointed because I really loved Goddess of Filth by this author, but this book really put a bad taste in my mouth. We're following a vampire in this book, and she was originally part of the Aztec Empire, and she was captured by Hernan Cortez and become like his translator. So this is actually a real person, which is what I did not realize, is that our main character was a real person at first. That's why I gave it 2 stars. But then when I realized that we were taking someone who literally was probably brutally assaulted, raped, and her people were actually brutalized, and then we are making her into a vampire who has horrific sex scenes in it, like, I just couldn't. Like, if you've read the sex scenes in this story, like, one, the sex scenes, the writing is bad, and then what makes it worse is that this was about a real person, and now we are taking real people who went through real horrific things and making them perform sex acts that are horrible. And then we also have Hernan Cortez in this book, who's also a vampire, who is also a real colonizer in real life. And what he does in the story, like the way that the story goes, is so stupid and so unserious. I'm like, could we literally do anything more unserious with people's real life stories and real horrific things that occurred? And then next up I have Diavola by Jennifer Thorne. I was really excited for this one, and it turns out these 2 were actually both for my Patreon book club, which normally, like last year, we had banger after banger, and this year we've been struggling. I don't know if it's just me or the books, or I don't know, but this one was also just disappointing for me. I really thought this was going to deliver on like an Italian summer vacation horror, and like half the book didn't even take place at the villa, and that was what was really disappointing for me. Another one that also disappointed me was Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. This one I read for my video where I read BookTuber's best books of the year, and this one was just a letdown for me. Like, I normally really like funny mysteries, like cozy mysteries, like more like funny books, but this one just did not deliver on me. I didn't care about the characters at all. I thought it was very lackluster and just bland. Like, it was just a very bland book to me. Like, it tried to be funny, but it just wasn't delivering. Question 6 is biggest surprise, and the first one is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, which I talked about earlier. And this book really shocked me because generally, traditionally published white romances do not do anything for me anymore, because I just feel like they're so repetitive, like this very much like rom-com kind of deal. I've heard of Abby Jimenez's books before, and I knew that people loved them, but I just didn't like show much of an interest in them. And I just found this at the used bookstore one day, and I was like, man, like let me buy it. And then I just decided to read it, and it completely took me off guard because this is one of my favorite romances that I've literally ever read. I feel like Abby Jimenez has the perfect amount of lighthearted, funny, kicking your feet, giggling moments with very like serious hardships of life. And I love that. Like, I feel like they're obviously very emotional romances, and I love those romances, but they could be very hard to read. And this one did still have hard things in it, but it feels more realistic to the actual balance that we face in real life. Like, this book literally feels like real life to me, and that's what I love about it. I haven't really read many books that feel like real life, especially like romance books by white authors, and this one just did it. Abby Jimenez is really that girl. The second one that I have for this question is The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This one shook me because I don't really read much YA anymore. I've actually been reading more this year than I think I have last year or the year before. So that's pretty interesting. But I read the first 2 in the series this year, and I've loved them. And I flew through this book. It's so addicting. It's so fast-paced. It's literally young adult Criminal Minds, and I loved it. It's so, so good. I highly recommend this series. Even if you don't read much young adult, I still recommend it. It's so, so good, and I'm so glad I bought the box set because I'm finishing the series off this year, no doubt about it. Next up is favorite new author, which can be debut or new to you, and I have 2 answers for this question. One is actually not new to me, but for me, I feel like to solidify a favorite author, it can't just be like one book. Like, I need to read at least 2 books, probably closer to 3 or 4 to actually solidify them as a favorite author. Both these authors I've only read 2 books from, but I just know that they're favorites, and the first one is, again, Abby Jimenez. So I read Part of Your World and the sequel this year, which is Yours Truly. This is a companion romance series, and I picked up the last book in the series, or the third one, I don't know if it's the last one in the series, Just for the Summer, which came out earlier this year, and I have not read that one yet, but I know it's going to be a banger. I love this series. This one I gave 4.5 stars. This one I gave 5 stars. This one is still like a phenomenal, really, really good romance, and honestly has probably more like serious discussions in it than this book does, but I feel like I just connect to the characters in this one more, and I really like the found family kind of town element that was in this one, but this one was still phenomenal, and I feel like I will literally love every single Abby Jimenez romance book that ever comes out. Like, I can just tell her writing, her characters, everything is for me. I plan on reading her entire backlist. So the second author is Rachel Harrison, because last year I read Black Sheep, which I adored. It was so phenomenal, and then I read Cackle, which was also so, so good, and her discussions are so great. A lot of people will claim that she's cozy horror, which she definitely is, but also at the same time, some of her horror is really terrible. Like, in Black Sheep, it's talking a lot about like your family and betrayal. This one, even though it is more cozy and like witchy and lighthearted in the horror, it still has scenes where you're like a woman and you're sitting across from a man that you met on a dating app, and you realize that he's literally a misogynist. Like, how horrific is that? Like, that's horrible. Like, if you're in real life and that happened to you, you would be terrified. You know what I'm saying? So it does still have some really like realistic, terrifying moments in it. I just love Rachel Harrison so much. She's so good. I am really glad that I picked this one up, and I cannot wait to read more of her work later this year. Question 8 is newest fictional crush, and honestly, I am bi, but none of the women have been sticking out to me this year. Like, even the woman in Bloom, I was like, like I kind of like her, but then the book turned into a horror book. Same thing with Cackle, and I feel like most of the romances I read, unfortunately, because of publishing, are heterosexual, and so more of like the women I'm like, oh, I want to be her, than I want to date her, if that makes sense. Because they also, I see that they be problematic, like they have problems that they need to solve. So all these are men, but I have quite a bit this year, surprisingly, because I feel like I don't really have many fictional crushes at my grown age, but apparently I do. Of course, I had to put Rowan on this list from Butcher and Blackbird. I love Rowan. He is an Irish chef. Like, what can't get better? Like, he literally has an accent. He's funny. He, you know, has morals. Okay, he may be a serial killer, but he only kills other serial killers. And I just thought that he was so like cute and funny, but like he also, you know, had a little bit of an edge to him, and I like that. I also needed to include Rain on this list from The Serpent and the Wings of Night, because this book was also a phenomenal book. It almost made it to my top 5 list, but it missed it just slightly. This is a vampire fantasy romance. So like, it is a vampire romance, but it's not like urban vampires that we would think like Twilight, because it's urban fantasy because it takes place in our world. But this is like a high fantasy with vampires in it, which I've never really, no, I take that back. I have read a couple before, but not many that I really loved. Rain, again, he is another kind of man with an edge to him, and I really like that a lot. And like the fact that he was a vampire, but he was also really funny and like lighthearted, but he had that edge to him and he was a vampire. Like, I love that. Daniel Grant from Part of Your World also needed to be included because I love Daniel. Like, I think he is one of the sweetest men that I've ever read about. I loved him. Honestly, the man here I really like too, but I don't remember his name, which shows that I didn't like him as much. He is so sweet and cute, but he's definitely like a man, and I like that. I think he is such like a down bad man. I love it. He was willing to uproot his entire life, throw away what he wants for the woman that he loves. And like, I really like in this book how that works out, because I'm not the type of woman to be like, oh yeah, literally everything that you care about, like just throw it out for me. So I like that the way that they resolved that, but the fact that he was willing to go to those lengths shows a lot. And he's a simp. I love a simp. I also of course had to mention Josiah from Before I Let Go. He is such a good man and such a good dad as well, and I love seeing that. That's one of the reasons I really like kids in books, because I really like seeing men and how they interact with kids, because I feel like that could honestly show a lot about a person's character. I know kids are not for everybody, and like sometimes you're just like and like especially if they're not your own kids, but the fact that they're his own kids and that he's actually a good dad really shows a lot to me, and I love that a lot. So I had to include him on this list. Next up is newest favorite character, and I have 2 for this one. First one, of course, up is Yasmin. I loved both the characters in this one so much. I had to include her because honestly, a lot of women characters in books annoy me. Like, I think that they're well-rounded good characters, but a lot of times I'm like annoyed by them because of the things that they do. But I loved Yasmin in this. I loved her story and everything that she went through. I think it was so realistic and like heartbreaking, her story, but the way that she's come out on the other side on top really just shows her strength and courage, and I love that. I think that she was such a strong character, but also allowed herself to be emotional and show her weaknesses as well, which I think is a really hard balance to strike, but I think she did it so well. This is why I love Kennedy Ryan, because her character is just And then I also wanted to include Emily from Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I loved Emily because, again, I feel like I could really relate to her. Just being with like my ADHD, I feel like she's the type of person that like her social battery gets drained very easily, very fast. And I'm also like that. Like, she likes to spend her time alone, and I'm very much like that. Like, I could literally go days without interacting with another human. I'd be fine. I love humans. I love my friends. I love talking. I love interacting, but I could also go a long time without it. So I loved seeing that in a character, because I feel like there's not a lot of characters that are really like that aren't like YA cringy main characters. Okay, she was such a good character. Question 10 is a book that made you cry. The first one up is Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. This is a short little novella that's about grief, and this is one of the most powerful grief stories that I've ever read. I've read quite a few, but this one was so good because this one really shows the lengths that a woman is willing to go to for her children and for their happiness, which I loved. I just love that concept. We follow a woman that lost her child, and she ends up going to like the place where he like passed away, like where they have his little vigil. She ends up dropping like a little bit of blood on it, and then she thinks that she starts to see her son. The lengths that she goes to in this book is crazy. I just thought it was so emotional and heartfelt and horrific at the same time. It's definitely a horror, but the grief in this just came across so strong. Honestly, none of these books actually made me cry, but if there was a book to make me cry, it would be one of these three. I forgot to say that. None of them made me cry. Not a single book this year has. These three books that I have definitely did get me close, though. The next one is Saving Noah by Lucinda Berry. This one is very similar in the way that it lengths a mother will go to for her child's happiness. I thought this one was really emotional at the end because this one follows a woman and her son reveals himself as being a pedophile. He's also a teenager and he does not want to be this way. He ends up going to a rehab facility, but he comes to the conclusion that this is just how he is. He doesn't want to be this way, but this is just how he is. And his mother is grappling with this, and it just goes into a different direction than I even thought of. This was so just emotional, and I don't even know how to describe it because the end really goes to show that some people really do have something that we look down upon in society. Of course, pedophilia is bad. Let me just put that out there. But something like that, and it's like something that they can't help. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's something that they really cannot help. Some people can, but some people cannot. And it really explores that, which I thought was so interesting. Like, him being demonized for something that he feels when he cannot control it is so interesting, but he definitely takes responsibility for his actions. It's very known throughout the story that pedophilia is bad, but just seeing the conflict that comes within himself and his mother was very interesting. And then lastly, I have The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston because I love this one as well. The 7 Year Slip I did enjoy more, and it's one of my favorite romances of all time. This one really made me almost close to crying because this one has to do with grief of losing specifically your father, which is one of my biggest fears, losing either of my parents. But my dad, he actually has epilepsy and has since I was a young child. So I've kind of been more like, not attached, but I would say like protective of him, and just losing my parents in general is very scary to me, and this dives a lot into that, which was really emotional for me personally. We follow a woman in this who is a ghostwriter. She ends up getting a new boss, and she also goes through a breakup, so she does not believe in love anymore, which makes it really hard because she ghostwrites romance, and she feels like she can't do her job properly because she doesn't believe in love anymore. Her father ends up passing away, and her family actually owns a funeral home, so she ends up going back to the funeral home, obviously to help with her father's death and obviously like properly be able to grieve him. This new editor that she just recently got ends up popping up as a ghost because our main character can see ghosts. Her father could also see ghosts. She's trying to help him figure out like why he died because he has no idea that he's even dead. So this one was really emotional for me with the parental loss. Question 11 is a book that made you happy, and I've mentioned all these books already in this tag, but sometimes books fill multiple questions, so we're just gonna have to talk about them again. And the first two are both the Abby Jimenez's. I love these ones so much, but I remember yours truly like sitting in the car. I remember I was driving to see my boyfriend late at night, and I could not stop smiling while listening to this audiobook. Like, I was smiling, giggling, kicking my feet, driving at 12 a.m. an hour away, and I just remember having such a good memory of this one. This one obviously is my favorite of the two, but this one I remember made me really, really happy. And also Emily Wilde. I just love this one so much. It was so fun, lighthearted. It was just so good. Question 12 is the most beautiful book that you've acquired this year. Obviously, again, Emily Wilde. I feel like I've mentioned this book so many times throughout this tag, but the cover of this one is just stunning. Like, I love the mushrooms and the foliage on it. I think it's beautiful. I also have Sugar Baby, which I love this cover because it's almost like watercolor because it has like water dripping. It looks like it was like a face, and there's glass and there's water dripping down the glass, but it reminds me a lot of watercolor, which I really like because I actually did a lot of art when I was younger. I dabbled in it, you might say. I did a lot of different hobbies throughout my life. I'm a hobby girl. I love a hobby, and so I love watercolor. It's one of my favorite mediums, so I just love this cover. I think it's stunning. I have not read this one yet, but I really, really want to. And then also Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Like, this one is stunning. I love the color blocking of it. That's one of my favorite things of this cover, because even though I do love like watercolor and like mixing of colors, something about this cover just really draws to me. Like, they look so happy with the dog and the sunset and just giving so summery. I really love this cover. Question 13 is your favorite book to movie adaptation that you've seen this year. And I honestly have not seen any movie ones, I don't think, but the one that I've liked a lot is Bridgerton, which I've not read the books. I've heard that they're really bad, but I really enjoyed the show. I also think Queen Charlotte is better, but that's not specifically like a book, so I can't mention that one. But Bridgerton really pulled me in. Honestly, I watched like an episode and a half and I was like, yeah, like it was fine, and I put it down for weeks and it just never drew me in. But then one day I was just like, I have the urge to really watch Bridgerton again. So I watched it and then I binged it all, Queen Charlotte, and then season 3 part 2 of Bridgerton came out and then I binged that too in a day. So I was just going through the show, flying through it, and I really enjoyed it. It's a lot of drama, a lot of tea, which is not always my favorite shows, and I think this show doesn't appeal to a lot of people in the beginning because it's so character driven and you're dropped right in and you're just like, who are these people? I don't really care what's going on. I don't care. I feel like once you start to understand the characters and the story, you begin to enjoy it more, even if it's not like your favorite TV show of all time, because it's not like super emotional or anything like that. I still feel like it is entertaining at the very least. And the last question is question 14, and that is, what books do you have to read before the end of the year? And honestly, I have a lot. I really need to wrap up my 24 to read in 2024. I read 9 of them, and I think I technically did 26 books, so I have 17 left. I at least want to read 24 of the 26. So I have 15 left to read, which is a lot, so I need to finish up that, but a lot of them are new releases. Some of them haven't come out yet or have just come out, so I haven't gotten the chance to read them. And then some of the backlist ones, I've read honestly most of them. I only have 5 backlist ones left, so that's not too bad. And then I also really want to read my anticipated releases that I talked about earlier in this video. I've also been making seasonal TBRs. Well, I just started this month, but I plan on making one for fall and winter as well, but winter like is only like December and then carries over into the next year. But I really want to read like my seasonal TBRs, like wrap up my summer TBR and my fall TBR, because I have this problem of like, I feel like I can only read the certain books in certain seasons and then I don't get around to them, and then I have to wait the next year and then I don't read them that year, and then I have to wait the next year and then I don't get around to it that year. So I'm really trying to read the books that I reserve for certain seasons in those seasons this year, so I actually get through my TBR. So that's all I have for this video today. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Let me know what your favorite book of the year is down below, and I'll definitely take that into account. Maybe I could do a video where I read my subscribers' favorite books so far of the year. I would love to do that maybe like in August. So if you have any recommendations for that video, let me know down below. If you made it to the end, leave a little goat emoji, because part of your world has a baby goat in it. So leave a goat emoji down below, and I will see y'all in the next one. Bye everybody.